Hey everyone, Tactics here, continuing my Keystone Legend Route Walkthrough series to help you get your portals and obtain that 3K rating mount. Where in this video, we've got one of the harder dungeons of Season 2. I'm going to be taking you through a Priory of the Sacred Flame run, showing you the route that we used and giving you some tips and tricks to hopefully help you get this key timed. As I've mentioned before, for the videos in this series, this is going to be a bit more difficult in terms of execution compared to my pug-friendly routes. However, I've still avoided doing anything crazy or super difficult as it's just not required to time keys in the plus 10 to plus 12 range. Instead, I'll save all that stuff for my 0.1% title route series, which will be releasing later on in the season. So if you're interested in advanced strategies, make sure you are subscribed to the channel so you know when those videos get released. Otherwise, let's get right into it here. We are on 1.25 times speed just for brevity. And we've got a pretty standard big lust pull here where I go in here to the right side, grab a knight. And then we've got this pack over here. We use ring right off the top here to knock this sharpshooter a little bit closer. And I can just move between the packs to have a bit better cleave. Obviously, you have a death knight. Quite easy to do. You can just grip it in. If you have other forms of knockbacks, you can potentially knock either this sharpshooter in or the first sharpshooter in. Either way, just getting them a little bit more grouped makes the cleave a bit nicer because these guys can get pretty scary in combination with the knights, the random target bleed, as well as the big AoE shout. And that's really what you're scared for here. Having some sort of AoE damage reduction on these shouts can be quite useful. But even if you're not doing that, something you want to be doing, if you are the target of the bleed, and this shout is going off, you need to press a personal. That is the most likely thing to get you killed on this pull. Something else you notice here, I did freedom myself. I am running double freedom in this dungeon. So I freedom myself and another melee player, and you can kind of spin around and soak these traps. They do no damage if you have freedom active. So a good paladin tech for this dungeon. And paladins in general, very, very, very good in this dungeon, kind of across the board, whether it's a prot, ret, or holy paladin. All three of them have really good general utility for this dungeon on top of grabbing the buff. So that's another big tech. Bring a paladin for this dungeon. It's kind of very, very good. Then this also tends to just chain into this pack here, which is not the end of the world. We do have the second knight now, but the first knight is almost dead. So at this point, it's not a big deal. So we just finish off this pack here. We do end up with these three packs. If we had another big knockback, something else we could do is knock this sharpshooter like in this pack and then add these guys to this three pack. We kind of used our ROP and we don't have another major knockback in this thing. And if we had death grips, it would be easier too. So we end up just finishing this three pack as is. But if you have the ability to bring this three pack with that three pack here and group the sharpshooters, that is very, very efficient. But yeah, I get rooted here. My freedom does expire, so beware of that. Watch the freedom timer to bubble it. And so now we've got these guys. So what we're going to end up doing here is we're going to pull the mini boss after dealing with these orbs. Suleiman into these three here that we didn't pull. And a tip for the knockback for tanks is the steps here do work to prevent the knockbacks. If you stand on the second step, you can see cast went off, nothing happened. I did not move. So the steps actually prevent you from getting knocked. So just use that second step there. It does kind of mean you don't want to move, so I'm not going to be moving here to try and group the sharpshooter. I step over just to get rid of the trap, but then I move right back, and it's just rotating defensives through on this knockback. Once the once these guys die, we are going to be rotating around to get the other three pack that we missed after this knock, most likely. So it's going to go off here in a second. I'll use that, run around, get some more efficient cleave here. And same deal, you could use the steps on this side as well. I'm not sure I actually get into the step in time. I think I do. Yeah, so you can use these steps as well. More efficient cleave. Finish these mobs off while you are waiting for the mini boss to run towards you. Grab the buff, of course. Don't forget. Could have gotten it earlier. And I'm going to grab these footmen over here, these three footmen. And we're going to do those with the new mini boss, Sergeant Chainmail. Nothing crazy to talk about here. Just make sure you are a little bit spread because this lunging strike, when it goes out, does cleave everyone near the player. It's also avoidable, for example, if you use mobility. So if the mage had seen it in time and blinked, or hunter could disengage, you can't avoid the bleed entirely. But it's not a huge deal, but a little piece of tech that you could use. We're going to go up the right side here. So this is a maybe controversial thing. I prefer fighting the right mini boss. And this maybe is more of a prot paladin tech, which we'll talk about in a second. But I think it makes the first boss so much easier for your tank. Your tank is an absolute hell if you fight that first boss with the mini boss from the right side, the holy mini boss with the tank buster and the AoE damage. It's a much harder tank fight if you fight it with that mini boss. Whereas if you fight it with the caster mini boss, who's tied to the left side, it's just some kicks that you don't even need to necessarily get, and then one major kick that you do need to get. So I personally prefer going right here. In terms of the pulls in this area, I've got one decent sized pull here. Pull the sharpshooter with the footman. We have one ranged player bait the war lynxes that come out. Again, this is totally avoidable, very similar to like the no-coup defensive charges, where you can have someone bait. You can use binding shot here to keep them all grouped. You can use ring of peace they'll jump out, they get stopped by the ring. Ursul's vortex, same deal, lots of stuff. And you could also avoid it like the previous mini boss we just talked about. Fast forwarding here, doing the big pack next. What you are worried about is this pack. We might actually pull it here. I'm not 100% sure. I think we do. Yeah, I ping it. So if you don't have a Mind Soothe, you will want to try and fight this pack a little bit more over this way before we pulled it. So if we pulled it a little bit earlier when it was here instead of where it is now, this ends up pulling the sharpshooter. I think we CC, yeah, we robbed this guy in. So this becomes a pretty dangerous pull now because we did butt pull. We've got 3 sharpshooters and 2 spamcaster priests and a knight. So it's very dangerous. I think it actually lined up with our cooldown, so it's not the end of the world for us in this key. But 1, if you have a priest, keep this Mind Soothe. 2, if you don't have a priest, just give it some respect. Be more this way on the path and try and pull this pack when it's further towards the boss and not towards this pack. Makes it a little bit easier. You can also use combat or threat reduction CC, so like Imprison, Sap, etc. on the mobs here. The close mob specifically is the one that is going to pull. So be aware of that. But if you have damage cooldowns, you can actually pull that. It's just a little bit dangerous. This is our recovery pull here. We need cooldowns going into this mini boss. It is still a dangerous mini boss. You do still want to kill it in a low amount of time. So we basically just kill these 4 mobs as a bit of a recovery pull here. And then we're going to go straight into the mini boss with the footman. And this is where we get to the potential prot paladin tech. So the big thing to note about this boss is the Seal of Flame and how it works. So essentially what this does is it empowers his auto attacks to de-electric fire damage and spawn circles under random players. Now, if you prevent the magic effect from happening, or if you prevent the melee attack from happening, none of the fire circles go out. So that's, if you dodge it, if you parry it, or if you immune it, all 3 of those things prevent the circles from going out. So obviously some specs have higher parry, have higher dodge than other specs, so that can be powerful here if you amp up your parry or amp up your dodge against those attacks. But Paladin specifically has a couple immunities, both with regular bubble as well as spell ward, because spell ward prevents the magic effect from happening. So what you can do here, as you can see happening, is I'm going to use spell ward shortly after the initial thing. So I'm going to let him get an auto attack off here, and then I'm going to spell ward to cover the rest of the buff. So 1 set of circles come out, and then nothing comes out. Then you've got the heat wave, which I'm going to be immune to because I'm in spell ward, and then it's going to be basically lasting for everything but the last tick of the actual buff. So that covers the whole first duration. Something else to keep in mind, heat wave. If you have freedom or a effect that immunes snares, specifically immune snares, you take no damage from heat wave. This also works on the thunderclap from the first mini boss Solomon that I didn't talk about there, but pre-freedom effects prevent you from taking damage from heat wave. So you can freedom people. I believe there's other pre-freedom effects that I'm not 100%, I don't remember them right now, but like Tiger's Lust does not work as an example because that is something that cleanses a snare. It doesn't immune you to the snare. So that is an important distinction. Anything that immunes you to the snare effect can be used on this heat wave effect here. Like I freed him. I think I'm freed. Oh, I did not freed him there, but I usually will freed him here. And then we get to the second set where I'm talking about Seal of Flame happens again. We let a couple autos go off here, and then I'll pop Bubble. That'll immune me for the rest of this buff here and this heat wave again. And then we can start kiting down the steps. And this is why I still, like, Paladin is still going to run out of tools here to prevent the application of these dots, right? I have parry because I have 4 stacks of parry from these mobs, but I don't have guaranteed parry, right? So I'm going to dodge some of them, but not necessarily all of them. And this is where we're going to have to start to kite down backwards. So having damage for that pack is still important, but as you can see there, very, very few circles, and that's a bit of a paladin tech. Other things you can do is you can kite this mob for some of the duration. That's more for a ranged group tech that really owns the melee DPS. They don't really like when you kite mobs, but for ranged DPS, that works pretty well. So it kind of depends on your comp and what tank spec you're playing. I believe AMS and, like Rune Weapon gives you super high parry. AMS prevents the magic effect from happening, I believe. Not 100% sure, but I believe it works that way. You'd have to test that yourself, but I think it should work that way. So depending on your tank spec, dealing with that mini boss is a lot easier. From here, we're just going straight through to the boss. Actually, I lied. We have to kill the mini boss first, which we're going to do with this 2-pack. And if the 3-pack behind us was still alive, we would also, after these 2 died, we would chain this mini boss into the 3-pack behind us and do that with this mini boss as well. So that's something we do here. And like I said, this mini boss on its own is not a big deal. It's when you have this divine judgment debuff going out at the same time on the boss fight as the bleed. Even if you get it dispelled quickly, it's still another tank buster to deal with. So it's just something that I personally prefer not to fight with the boss. Plus, this Holy Radiance does infinitely more damage than the fire bolts. So you can just let firebolt kicks go off, and it's not really a big deal. They did somewhat fix the overlap with the fireball. I'll just fast forward to the boss fight here as we go through. Oh yeah, someone died to the links. So there was an overlap that where the boss would be doing the swirlies, the mini boss, when the actual boss would be pouncing on someone. Now they added a like 5-second, I think, grace period to that. So now mostly doesn't happen. There's still like a very slight overlap between them. So that's just something to be aware of. And you basically just want to watch the boss and make sure you are hard focusing the boss before that mauling comes out so that you can break that shield instantly. But the overlap is not too bad. It does happen here on this fight as well. So the big thing on this boss is that generally you want to keep a kick on the boss for the battle cry and a kick on the mini boss for Cinder Blast. Outside of that, all spare kicks can go to the fireball, but like I said, the fireball does not do a ton of damage when it goes off, so it's not really the end of the world if it does go off. If you get targeted by the pounce, that's kind of your defensive point. For tanks, Pierce Armor is something you want a defensive rotation on. You want it to last through as much of the dot as possible, so you pop defensives late in the cast of the actual attack. Bleed cleanses do work if you have an evoker in your group. If you are a dwarf, if you have other ways to clear bleeds like immunities, whatever, those are great for this boss fight. Make sure you use those as well. And you can actually, on sets that you need to like dwarf, for example, I found that the actual initial hit is not too scary. So like base defensives on a paladin are enough to handle that. So you can actually commit no defensives to ones that you plan on bleed cleansing, which is pretty nice, assuming you bleed cleanse early. Ember Storm is just, avoid. These are both random and player baited, so be aware of that. And then it just keeping kicks really on the mini boss and the boss, and you're not really having a ton of problems. I think the overlap comes potentially on the next Ember Storm. Yeah, you can see here on the timers, which so many timers here, need to fix that. But here you're going to have the Ember Storm, and you're going to have the Savage Mauling be pushed slightly. This is the fix Blizzard did, where it's like a 5-second delay. You still have plenty of time, as you can see, to kill the shield before the circles actually detonated. Like the person was in circles, but there's such a delay between the circles landing and the actual circles coming out, so that you can destroy that shield in time. Just make sure you are swapping to it. And it was on the third mauling, I believe. Just make sure you're hitting the boss around just over a minute in, and you'll break it with more than enough time. Previously, if you were doing this boss fight like in week 1, this overlap was much worse than it is now. But Blizzard has done a bit of a grace period, basically, to make it a little easier. But that's this boss. Again, don't need to focus Taint or do them all, but they do share damage, so hitting him does help. And then once the boss dies, he disappears. And then you get the room before Baron Braunpyke, which is a lot of tough trash. We do, of course, grab these neophytes on pull here. Double Paladin, double Templar, some things to note. Paladins obviously own, they have Divine Toll. That is something you want to make sure healers are ready to top players for every time it happens, especially when there's multiple Paladins in a group. Templars own your tank. if you have a purge in your group, you can steal their magic buff. It's a 30% damage done increase. So our mage is very happy here. He's just spell stealing them whenever they're available, and he gets a big damage increase for his combustion. So it's nice. And we're just doing this pack initially, making it pretty straightforward here. Double Paladin. Divine Toll is like a little scary, but they also have that desync tech, so they're never going to cast at the exact same time. And so we're going to go through here. We're going to end up doing a double pull in the next area. So pulling both sides together. Again, this may be a bit more of a paladin specific thing because I can basically keep one priest interrupted on my own. And then the rest of the group is kicking the other priest here. And we're just going around and we're just healers ready to keep us topped every time the divine toll goes out. Cutting in a bit of a circle here as consecrates going out, getting kicks on the priests, and they end up dying very quickly because they have much less health than the rest of the pack. Rotating here through defensives because there's also 3 Templars in this pack, and again having purges available here to remove the magic debuff, and that's the wings one, by the way. They have 2 you can see here. This is the magic debuff you can purge. This one is not purgeable, so don't try and purge that one. And it's just mostly just rotating through your defensives here, being ready for those sacred toll casts. Healers topping people between sacred toll casts. You can see here 3 of them, they go back to back to back. And then you have a bit of a grace period here where there's not much happening. 2 more packs coming in. We hold a little bit here to get some defensives back. There's also a bunch of casters in this one, so we're going to just basically damage the casters down a bit. And then once we have damage and cooldowns available, once we get the okay from the healer, we're going to chain this pack as well. And then this is going to be a similar deal where there's going to be like 3 paladins or something like that in this pull, as well as a couple Templars. There's only the 1 Templar, actually. So there's a lot less Templars in this pull, much more in the first pull. So that's, you know, part of the reason you can commit so much defensives to that first double pull, because there's only 1 Templar in this next one. So you're not nearly as scared as the tank player. But, you know, defensively, there's a similar amount of Divine Tolls going out here. So you really want to be aware, especially with these casters in the Divine Tolls. You can see our Hunter dropped really low there. You want to make sure you're getting those interrupts when the paladins are divine tolling, because otherwise it's very, very scary. It's kind of also why we paused a little bit to let us get those 2 casters on the one side much lower before we chain pulled, because there's a lot more casters in this pack replacing those Templars. Then we get to Baron Braunpyke, which I did cover in my recent video on hardest bosses this season, if you want to check that out in super detail. But basically, we're bouncing together as a group here, you know, whether the hammers spawn or the shield spawn. We're going to bait them here, move across the room. The spell cadence seemed a bit inconsistent in terms of when shields were happening, but the pyre seemed pretty consistent. Couple ways to handle this. We're do here, basically we just soak insta. The first one, 3 players just instantly soak it. Use a defensive if you're a soaker, especially because potentially this lines up with a castigator shield, and again, can be very, very dangerous. The other thing you can do is you can have your tank take 2 stacks here, pop a defensive, and then they can do your normal kiting, and then when the shields are gone or hammers are gone, they can go back and soak it once their dot is off as well and take a 3rd dot. Less group damage in that way, but significantly higher tank damage, so be aware of that. Potentially, depending on what tank spec you are, can be very, very scary. If you have a tanky group, it's easier to probably do the everyone soak the 3-stack one. And then the real question is what you do when you get to the 5-stack pyre, which I'm going to fast forward to. It's not this one, this is another 3-stack. Oh, we died. Oh, yes, that happened. That's right. I think we missed a kick here. Oh, yeah, we missed a kick and we died. Yeah, so make sure everyone is looking at the kicks and make sure you do get that interrupt, because basically if a kick goes off, you do just die. So let's fast forward back to this boss fight. We're doing it again, same thing. Let's get to the 3rd pyre again, which is always... 3rd pyre here is always going to be a 5-stack. And this is where it really pays off to have any immunity in your group. Any immunity works, so any paladin bubble, again, which is why paladin is really strong. Obviously, spell ward also counts as an immunity here. AMS is actually quite good here as well. Basically, anything that prevents the application of this dot, because what it lets you do here on the 5-stack is you can just pop your immunity and then soak a bunch of them. Boom, just really fast here, get them all done. Hammer, bait, and we're done. It's done. Any immunity lets you do that. Doesn't need to be on the tank either. It can be literally anyone. AMS, you need to be careful because I think your AMS pops like 3 in. Like you do like 3 pops and your AMS disappears because it gets absorbed by the magic damage. So be aware of that. And if you don't have immunities, you can do a similar strat to the first one that I talked about, where you have your tank take 2. Then you have 2 other players with a defensive take 1 each. Then you move away. And then your tank, when their dot is gone and the hammers are cleared, they can run back and take their final stack of the thing. So a very similar strat to what we mentioned for the 3-1, but it's kind of a combination of having your tank take a lot and multiple people helping out for it. Just be careful. You have like 30 seconds, I believe, 20 to 30 seconds before the pyre blows up and wipes you. So make sure you get back and soak that extra one before that happens. Otherwise, just bouncing back and forth, continuing with that strategy. Castigator shield, we move, hammers, we move, and just stay as a group generally, and that's how you handle this boss. Pretty standard pull here. Again, kicks, paladins. We've talked about that. I'm going to fast forward it here. In terms of Bloodlust, by the way, yeah, it was first pull, and it was Braunpyke. Or was it Braunpyke? No, it was the first boss, potentially, I think, where we did the other lust. Yeah, I think it was first boss here. Yeah, we just lusted on CD. We're having our lust come up now. I believe we're just going to hold it at this point because we're going to get to the last boss, and we're going to use it on the last boss. In terms of pulls in this room, don't be afraid to use the LOS around here. These are pretty standard pulls. Again, we're doing 2 packs off the top here. Pulling 2 light spawns is a little scary. These light spawns and their purification does a ton of damage. So if you have combat drops like Feign, Invis, Shadow Meld, Vanish, use them when you get targeted by purification. It drops the cast entirely. Very, very valuable there. Also beware when they get to 25% health is when they do their circle cast, and you really want to make sure, especially the paladins, don't get healed by this cast. If he's channeling purification, he won't interrupt it, so be aware of that as well. So now he's going to start casting. This is the weird part. The paladin started cast consecrate, we barely get him out, so be aware of that. Then we can just kind of pull more in here, and it's kind of broken up in the pulls here. You have the patrol that's kind of big. You have this 3-pack here with the patrolling footmen. Mainly, again, don't want to pull 2 light spawns, so I'm just grabbing this close pack here because the patrol is kind of far away. You also have rebuffs here of the buff of the dungeon, the paladin priest buff in this room. If anyone ever died, you can use that to rebuff them. And again, pretty straightforward pulls here, getting kicks on the mages. Beware the footmen and the mages in this room do detonate on death. It's not really scary on these pulls, but it's scary once you actually do the mini boss. So again, we're chaining here. Once this light spawn's almost dead, gonna pull these guys. Waiting for the patrol to come in. Grab the patrol when this is slow. Just kind of chain pulling in this area. And then once we kill the light spawn on this one, that's when we'll go into the mini boss here. And then we'll chain this mini boss around to the priests in the corner as we're killing the mini boss. So killing that light spawn, get this guy. And again, this is where you're kind of scared when you do end up chaining this mini boss. We're going to kill the priest first, of course. There's a lot of damage going out here because he just deals pulsing ticking damage. So you want to be careful when you're chaining this guy because there's a lot of the Arisen warrior guys in this corner. So you're going to see us in a second here. Just kill these priests and then chain the mini boss once the tank buster goes out, I think. Probably going to go on because there was so much time on the tank buster, but I think I would just wait for the tank buster, make sure I have a good defensive for it because it is quite scary. Then we pull the priest in, got the footman and the priest, and we just cleave these guys so we're not hitting just one target here, and we're not overwhelmed by the number of casters because obviously pulling 3 priests is a bit sketch. Leaving these guys down, and then once their Braunpyke dies here, we're going to chain into the corner, getting the kick probably on this priest, yeah, then chaining, getting the last count. This is our full count now. And then we're going to go into the boss here with the remaining footmen, I believe. Yeah, we're going to go in the boss with the footmen. Just be aware, obviously, the footmen will detonate on death. So if you have a bad overlap with the footmen dying, that can be quite bad. We're just going to go into around like 30% health. This is kind of fine. Chain right into the boss. Then we got the final boss here, which is pretty straightforward initially. So you've got the Holy Flame of Void. The big thing is the actual damage overlap here with the blinding light, which of course you want to look away for, and the actual buff the boss puts on himself in Inner Fire, which is where the main group damage comes from. It's this Holy Fire buff on the group. So if you are ever have the AoE blinding light going out while this is active, that's where you're scared. That's where you'd want to press things like personals or group defensives because you got the ticking damage plus the hit from the blinding light as well. So be aware of that. That's like the main spooky overlap. It doesn't always happen, as you saw there, it casted after, but sometimes it does cast before, and sometimes later on in the fight, it will be active when that's going off. So that's when you want to be careful. That's the big wombo combo, like here. There we go. We have it into the blinding light. It's much scarier in terms of health. You can see how low people get. So that's where you want to be careful with your health. Use defensives. Then we're saving, as you can see here, we're saving CDs as we get closer to 50% health because we want to make sure we burn the boss. 50% is going to happen in a second here. We're going to run up the side. Now, apparently what I've heard is that if you all go up the same side, you hug the one side here, you can potentially bait all the trash mobs on one side. I don't know how true that is. I haven't seen it done myself personally, but apparently there's potentially some tech there. So maybe I'll cover that if it's more determined and more exact in my advanced video for the 0.1% title stuff. But it's not a big deal to have them spread here. If you have a couple types of CC, so we're going to go down here, right? We have the binding shot on one side, tar trap and ROP on the other side. And then, we have things like blinding light, which I'll try and use here a little bit, but obviously gets broken by damage. Leg sweep, Frost Novas, any CCs you have, that's our comp, right? But whatever CC your comp has, use those to slow these mobs so that you don't really have to deal with them. They do constantly take their own damage. So if you keep them CC'd enough, Mass Entangle, Ursul's Vortex, both very good if you have a Druid, and you can just have them kind of die down here, and then you never need to be close to them because they do that pulsing damage around themselves, which can be quite scary. And in terms of damage, you see we have damage ready. We have Lust here to break that shield as quickly as possible so that we don't get a second spawn of ads, because that gets pretty scary because you tend to commit most of your CCs or all of your CCs to the first set. If you get a second set, very, very scary. If that ever does happen, I recommend just dragging the boss as far away as you can and just AFKing at the back here with the boss, and hopefully they die before they get to you or they're very low. So that's something in case that happens. But otherwise, it's just the same thing here, right? It's a repeat of phase one, just cleaving or killing the boss. Beware of the overlap if inner fire and blinding light happens, just like this. Again, this is the scariest overlap of the fight. You get a couple ticks with the blinding light, so use defenses and stuff there. We just rally there as an example, and just keep kicks and just make sure you are burning the boss and not stepping down the stairs and getting hit by this stuff. But there we have it, guys. Hopefully this helps you out in Priory. Get that key timed. If it does, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content like it, including similar guides for all 8 Season 2 dungeons, and then more advanced routes for players looking to push for the 0.1% title. As always, I need to give a massive thank you to all of my Patreons for their continued support. It makes all this content possible, so thank you, and I'll see everyone in the next video.